Of course. Here's an engaging introduction for your YouTube video story. I never thought a simple ride home would change the way I saw someone forever. It was supposed to be just another fun night, music blasting, people laughing, the usual chaos of a house party. I was having a good time, but as the night dragged on, I realized I needed to leave. My phone was nearly dead, and my friend, who was supposed to give me a ride, was nowhere to be found. That's when my friend's dad showed up. I wasn't expecting him to be the one picking me up, but I was relieved. He was one of those dads everyone liked, laid back, always cracking jokes, the kind of parent you didn't feel awkward around. When he pulled up outside, I quickly slid into the passenger seat, grateful to finally be heading home. The car smelled like leather and faint cologne, and the low hum of the radio filled the silence between us. At first, it was just normal small talk. He asked if I had a good time, if I needed anything before heading home, just being polite. But then, something shifted. His tone changed, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. His fingers tapped anxiously on the steering wheel, and he let out a deep breath, like he was working up the courage to say something. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe he had something on his mind that had nothing to do with me. But then, out of nowhere, he said my name in a way that made my stomach drop. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice quieter now, more serious. My mind raced. What could he possibly have to say to me? Was this about my friend? Was something wrong? I shifted in my seat, suddenly more aware of how quiet the car had gotten. The air felt heavier, like something invisible was pressing down on us. I tried to laugh it off, to keep things light, but he didn't smile. Instead, he kept his eyes on the road, gripping the wheel a little tighter. That's when he said it. Something I never expected, something I wasn't sure I even wanted to hear. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just another car ride home. This was the kind of conversation that could change everything. I sat there, frozen, my mind racing with possibilities. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, hesitation, maybe even regret. The streetlights flickered past us as we drove, their glow stretching across the windshield in long, ghostly streaks. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "What is it?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice came out quieter than I intended. For a moment, he didn't answer. He just kept driving, his hands gripping the wheel like he was holding on to something much bigger than the car. The silence stretched between us, making my heart pound a little harder. I could hear my own breathing, the faint sound of the tires against the road. I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear whatever he was about to say, but I also couldn't look away. "I've been keeping this in for a long time," he finally said. His tone was steady, but there was something about it that put me on edge. "And I don't know if it's right or wrong to tell you now, but I can't hold it in anymore." I felt a chill run down my spine. I shifted in my seat, glancing at him out of the corner of my eye. His jaw was tight, like he was fighting with himself. The car felt smaller, the air heavier. I wanted to ask what he meant, but I was afraid of the answer. My brain was throwing out all kinds of ideas. Was this about my friend? About something I did? Was he in trouble? He let out a sharp breath, shaking his head slightly, like he was frustrated with himself. "I don't expect you to understand," he continued, "but I need you to listen." I nodded, even though he wasn't looking at me. My fingers dug into my jeans, trying to ground myself, trying to prepare for whatever was coming next. The roads were empty now, the world outside passing in a blur. The farther we drove, the more uneasy I felt. I could hear the slight tremble in his voice, like he was battling something inside. And the worst part? I still had no idea what he was about to say, his fingers gripping the wheel a little too tightly. The air between us was thick with something unspoken, something heavy. My heart pounded as I waited for him to say whatever had been weighing on him, but a part of me didn't want to hear it. I wanted to believe it was something simple, something harmless, but deep down I knew this was something big, something that would change everything. And there was no turning back now. The car felt like it was moving too fast, even though I knew we were still within the speed limit. My friend's dad hadn't looked at me once since he started talking, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I shouldn't be saying this, he muttered under his breath, almost like he was talking to himself. His voice was lower now, rougher, like he was struggling to get the words out. He exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. But I can't pretend anymore. I forced myself to take a deep breath, trying to stay calm, even though my hands were starting to tremble. The tension in the car was unbearable. My brain kept jumping to the worst possibilities. Was he about to confess to some horrible secret? Did he do something? Did he know something about my friend that I didn't? He finally glanced at me for the briefest second, his expression unreadable. "There's something I've been holding back for years," he said. "Something I wish I could change." I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting into knots. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. But before he could answer, a sharp turn in the road jolted us both, breaking the moment. My pulse spiked as I grabbed onto the seat, but he barely reacted. He was too deep in whatever storm was brewing inside him, and just like that, I knew, whatever he was about to say, it was going to change everything. The car felt colder now, even though the heater was still humming softly. My friend's dad gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white, his jaw clenched like he was fighting some invisible battle in his head. The tension was suffocating, pressing down on me as the road stretched ahead in eerie silence. I wanted to ask him again, push him to just say it, but something in his expression made my stomach tighten. He looked scared. The wind howled outside as we passed through an empty stretch of road, the streetlights flickering in and out. My fingers dug into my lap as I tried to prepare myself for whatever was coming. But how do you prepare for something when you don't even know what it is? He let out a slow, shaky breath. "I've spent so long pretending everything's fine," he muttered. "But it's not. It never was." His voice was thick with emotion, and for the first time I noticed the way his hands trembled slightly against the wheel. My mind raced. What was he trying to tell me? Was it about my friend? Was it something about me? The worst possibilities flashed through my head, but none of them made sense. The car slowed down as we approached a red light, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he turned to look at me. His eyes were darker than usual, filled with something I couldn't quite place. Regret? Pain? I wasn't sure, but it sent a chill down my spine. "There's something I should have told you a long time ago," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The light turned green, but he didn't move. The car sat still in the middle of the empty road, the silence stretching between us, thick and suffocating. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, every second dragging out painfully. And then, just as I opened my mouth to demand an answer, he finally spoke the words that made my entire world tilt on its axis. The car sat still in the middle of the road, the green light glowing above us like a signal to move forward, but neither of us did. My friend's dad gripped the wheel so tightly I thought he might break it. His breathing was uneven now, his whole body tense. And then, just as I was about to say something, anything, to break the silence, he finally spoke. "I shouldn't be the one telling you this," he murmured, almost like he was talking to himself. "But I can't keep pretending." My stomach twisted. The way he said it, the weight in his voice, it wasn't just some casual confession. This was big, I opened my mouth to ask what he meant, but before I could, a loud horn blared behind us. The car behind us flashed its headlights, the driver impatient. The moment shattered, but the tension didn't break. He muttered something under his breath and finally pressed the gas, the car lurching forward. But I wasn't letting this go. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice sharp now. "Tell me." His hands flexed against the steering wheel, his lips pressing into a thin line. For a second, I thought he might back out, pretend this whole thing never happened. But then, without looking at me, he finally said it. "It's about your family," he muttered. "About your dad." Everything inside me went still. "My dad?" My voice barely came out. "What about him?" His fingers tapped anxiously against the wheel. "I thought you knew," he said, shaking his head. "I thought someone would have told you by now." My breath caught in my throat. The road outside blurred as my mind tried to process what he was saying. "Told me what?" I demanded, my pulse pounding in my ears. He glanced at me then, just for a second, and the look in his eyes sent a shiver down my spine. "That he's not who you think he is." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My dad wasn't who I thought he was? My mind scrambled for meaning, searching for anything that could make sense of this moment. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My friend's dad hesitated, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He took a deep breath, like he was about to rip off a bandage. "Your dad. He's been keeping secrets from you. From everyone." My stomach twisted. "What kind of secrets?" I pressed, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. He hesitated again before finally saying, "I shouldn't be the one telling you this, but he's not your real father." The world seemed to tilt. My breath caught, my vision blurred, and for a moment I forgot how to speak. "That's not possible," I choked out. "There's no way." But deep down, something clicked. The late-night phone calls my mom would hush up. The way my dad always seemed to dodge questions about his past. The gaps in family stories that never quite added up. It had always been there, just beneath the surface. Tears burned my eyes, but before I could process it, my friend's dad said something that made my blood run cold. "And there's more." His voice was tight. "The man who is your real father, I know him." I turned to him, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. "Who is he?" His grip tightened on the wheel, his jaw clenched. Then, finally, he spoke. "He's someone you've met before." And just like that, everything I thought I knew shattered into something unrecognizable. The air in the car felt thick, heavy with the weight of what he had just said. My real father was someone I had met before. My mind raced through every possibility, every face that had ever been a part of my life. A teacher, a neighbor, a family friend. Nothing made sense, and yet, deep down, I felt like I already knew. I turned to him, my voice shaky. "Tell me." He exhaled slowly, his grip on the wheel finally loosening. "It's—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "You need to hear this from him, not from me." Frustration boiled inside me, but I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. This wasn't easy for him either. He wasn't the villain in this story. He was just the messenger, and maybe, just maybe, he had been carrying this secret for longer than he should have. The rest of the ride was quiet, the tension still thick but different now. I didn't press him for more. I wasn't sure I even wanted to hear more. My whole life had changed in a matter of minutes, and I had no idea what to do with it. When we finally pulled up to my house, I sat there for a moment, staring at the front door. The place I had grown up. The place I had felt safe. But now, it felt like a stranger's home. I turned to him one last time, searching for something. Maybe reassurance, maybe permission to be angry, but he just gave me a small, tired nod. "You're stronger than you think," he said. I stepped out of the car, my heart still racing, my mind still spinning. The truth was out now, and there was no going back.